This video will take a look from a Christian perspective at a speech given by Vice President Joe Biden before the country's largest LGBT rights organization. He starts actually with a very good quote, actually a quote from a Supreme Court justice that I have as my icon here on YouTube, and we'll hear him say that.
Justice Holmes, and he said, "The mind of a bigot is like the pupil of the eye. The more light you pour on it, the more tightly it will contract."
So that is a great quote. Not too great about what he means by it, though, because he's basically calling anybody, all the people he represents, anybody that doesn't agree with him on this issue, a bigot. It doesn't matter how informed you are. It doesn't matter if it's from your religious conviction, and he's a Catholic and he understands that. It doesn't matter about your moral convictions or anything. If you don't agree with him and the Human Rights Campaign, then you're simply painted as a bigot. And basically, the speech is just an encouraging one. He's just trying to motivate the folks there, and there's a theme of courage that runs that he talks about throughout the speech. He can't really claim it for himself. He came out, he gave support to same-sex marriage less than 3 years ago. So basically, once the momentum was already over the tipping point, as he get on board himself. So he's actually indicting himself as a bigot as well for most of his life. But I'd like to go ahead, and here he's going to be talking about Dr. Ben Carson, who came out earlier this week, and about how he thought that homosexuality was a choice. You can look at a video I made concerning that in the description below. And his reaction is to use God's name in vain twice. So just think, he's talking about people not being bigots, not to be rude to others, and does he care about religious people in this country, even people within his own church? And what kind of response does he get for using God's name in vain twice in front of a gay rights group? Here it is. And I'm going to stop it right there, because he was so pleased by their reaction, he goes ahead and uses God's name a third time. And in our last clip, I'm going to play here for you.
In the straight community in the last several years, many of you are very successful businessmen and women. If 5 years ago you were in a fancy restaurant in Washington, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, any major city, and you went from the hedge fund you work with or the company you work with, and you went to lunch with your colleagues, and a waiter walked up and he had a pronounced lisp, and one of the people at this table said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'll have." Everybody, the rest of that table would have remained silent. Today, the rest of that table is empowered to speak up and say, "You horse's tail. What the hell's the matter with you?" Think about it. Think about it.
Yes, let's think about that for a moment, because as from the perspective of a faithful Christian, to what the Bible says, many of the changes that he's talking about, we don't see as good. But something I think that we can think of as good is that we have come to understand others different in the LGBT community better, and not to be rude or crude, and not to do these things. Unfortunately, the people in this community don't see it the same way. they're actually going the opposite direction, and they're getting more rude and crude towards others instead of kinder and more loving with all the name calling that they do. And it's also interesting how he says, that now people will speak up. Well, who's going to speak up in the Christian community? They're actually pushing for people not to say anything, and that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, yes, there's some vocal ones, but pretty much, people are saying nothing. I mean, if the clip I showed earlier, what if the vice president had said some type of slur against an LGBT person? Do you think that the Human Rights Campaign and all the folks that follow them and support them would speak up? Well, sure. How many emails or calls has the White House received over him using God's name in vain 3 times during the speech? I sent one. Are you going to send one? Probably not. We're just in a habit of doing nothing, and this is actually one of the greatest assets this movement has, is Christians are used to doing nothing, and that's probably what's going to happen and probably continue. And we complain about things, but if we don't take action, it's just like voting. If you don't vote, then don't complain about the government. And so if you don't take any action, then don't complain about it. But I definitely think that there is no room for disparaging gay people or transgendered people, that just because I don't agree with them on many of these matters doesn't mean that they deserve to be mistreated. And let's play the remainder of the clip.
That's a greater insight into how rapidly things are changing, in my view, than almost anything else. I always kid Chad when we speak and others that every time I'd walk out of my grandfather Finnegan's home, he'd yell, "Joey, keep the faith." But I want you to remember what my grandmother would say. She'd say, "No, Joey, go spread it. Spread the faith, folks. We are going to fully, totally, thoroughly succeed."
So keep the faith. I wonder what faith his grandfather was speaking of. Was he depressed every day and he was just trying to say, hey, cheer up? Or was he saying, hey, we're faithful Catholics, keep the faith? I think it's probably the latter. And then certainly to go along with what his grandmother would say, which was spread the faith. Well, spread what faith? Well, probably his Catholic faith. And so here he takes that and he twists it to do what is in direct opposition and a contradiction to the Catholic faith, which is to support what the Bible says not to do, which says his church says not to do, what his church does not support. And so, yes, they are spreading their word. And are we spreading our word? I mean, their word is, about just something in this temporal life, and it's something against God. We have a message, the gospel, that is something that will last for eternity and is for God. With this great a difference, how much more important is it for us to share the Christian message? And unlike how they look at Christians who are faithful to what the Bible says, Vice President Joe Biden and the folks at the Human Rights Campaign and all their supporters are not the enemy. These are folks that need to know the love of God. They need to be prayed for, and they need to know the forgiveness and the love that God truly has to offer them.